It led to Ron blacks out and Ron makes wee-wee.
Ron Howard has always been the calm eye in Hollywood's storm, a man known for his class and quiet strength. But when someone asked him about the darker side of the industry that raised him, his tone shifted fast. "You wouldn't believe what those legends did when the cameras stopped," he whispered once. Turns out the so-called golden age of Hollywood wasn't golden at all. It was a world built on silence and ego, where fame could hide almost anything. The same stars who shaped America's dreams were also breaking people down behind closed doors. And now, years later, Ron isn't afraid to name names. Errol Flynn, the devil behind the smile. Before James Bond or Jack Sparrow, there was Flynn, the ultimate movie rebel, oozing charm, danger, and wild energy. On screen, he was the fearless adventurer. Off screen, he lived like there were no rules. Born in 1909 in Tasmania, Flynn hit Hollywood in the 1930s and exploded into fame after Captain Blood in 1935. Studios built his image into legend, but behind the fame hid a man driven by pride and reckless living. By the early 1940s, things got messy. Two teenage girls, Peggy Satterley and Betty Hansen, accused him of serious wrongdoing. The trial became headline chaos. America split down the middle. Flynn laughed in court, acting like his fame made him untouchable. Warner Brothers brought in top lawyers. Fans camped outside. And behind the scenes, powerful people worked to make the case disappear. He was found not guilty, but that didn't mean he changed. In private letters uncovered in 1978, Flynn bragged about his behavior and mocked the women who had once feared him. Ron Howard said reading about that trial flipped a switch inside him. "That's when I realized Hollywood could protect anyone as long as they smiled for the camera." To insiders, Flynn stayed a cautionary legend, reckless, wild, and self-destructive. By 1959, years of drinking, drugs, and chaos had caught up to him. He collapsed in Vancouver at just 50. The reports said heart failure and ulcers, but Howard saw it differently. He died the same way he lived, taking everything and giving nothing. Flynn's downfall became the warning sign for what Hollywood had become, a place where charm covered up cruelty and fame made people untouchable. Then came Kirk Douglas, the man who couldn't stop fighting. To Ron Howard, Douglas was Hollywood's biggest contradiction. On screen, he stood for honor and justice, but off camera, his temper could shake a room. Born Izer Danielovich in 1916 to poor immigrant parents, Douglas clawed his way up through pure grit. By the time Spartacus turned him into a worldwide icon, he had it all: fame, money, power. But those who worked beside him whispered about something darker. That fierce temper didn't fade when the director yelled, "Cut!" Crew members said Kirk Douglas was a storm in human form, impossible to please and quick to explode, leaving people shaken. Actress Deborah Paget once revealed, he didn't just want to dominate a scene, he wanted to dominate everyone in it. Ron Howard, who studied Douglas's performances early in his career, later admitted, "There's a kind of rage under that smile, the kind that eats a person alive." That fire followed Douglas for decades. Rumors about his behavior toward women never faded, with biographers hinting at dark secrets Hollywood worked hard to bury. In the 1950s, talk spread about a serious incident involving young actress Natalie Wood, a story that resurfaced years later through her sister Lana's 2018 memoir. Douglas was never charged, and the system protected him, just like it did so many powerful men back then. Even after his passing in 2020 at 103, the controversy came roaring back, this time as a reckoning across film sets. His presence on screen could inspire greatness or spark fear in equal measure. Director Stanley Kubrick, who worked with him twice, once said he was the most driven man I've ever met and the hardest to control. Ron Howard later reflected that Douglas's career wasn't just about talent or fame. It was about unchecked power. He truly believed the rules didn't apply to him, and for years Hollywood agreed. When Douglas accepted an honorary Oscar in 1996, many saw not a hero, but a man finally facing his own legend. For Ron Howard, Kirk Douglas's final bow wasn't a redemption story. It was the last act of a man who spent his whole life trying to outrun his own demons. Beneath all that applause hid a truth Hollywood refused to face. Some of its biggest legends didn't build their names on brilliance, but on fear. And then came Faye Dunaway, the queen of cruelty. If Errol Flynn stood for corruption and Douglas for raging power, Dunaway was something colder, cruelty wrapped in beauty. To Ron Howard, she proved that evil in Hollywood didn't always come through violence. Sometimes it came through control, humiliation, and an ego so massive it crushed anyone nearby. Born in 1941 in Bascom, Florida, Dunaway rose fast. From Bonnie and Clyde in 1967 to Chinatown in 1974, she became untouchable, a goddess on screen, icy, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. But behind that shimmer came whispers of chaos. Crew members talked about her tantrums, her endless demands, and how she treated assistants like they didn't matter. Her mommy dearest co-star Rutanya Alda once admitted, "You could feel the fear on set. Everyone waited for her to explode." The film, meant to expose a cruel mother, ended up mirroring Dunaway herself. Ironically, while portraying Joan Crawford, a woman infamous for torment, Dunaway reportedly behaved the same way. Director Frank Perry even confessed he nearly quit because her outbursts made filming unbearable. She threw things, screamed at makeup artists, and once refused to film until the lighting made her look divine. Ron Howard later used her as the perfect example of what happens when an actor's hunger for control turns into emotional chaos. And the stories just kept coming. On The Wicked Lady, Dunaway allegedly slapped a cameraman, and during Don Juan DeMarco, she was said to have spit on a crew member. Assistants claimed she'd humiliate them until filming had to stop for a full day. Her former manager, Jay Bernstein, once said, "Faye doesn't just play divas, she becomes them." By the 2000s, her reputation finally caught up with her. Hollywood stopped calling. Directors didn't want the drama anymore, labeling her impossible to work with. In 2011, after being fired from a Broadway revival of Tea at 5, Dunaway pointed fingers at everyone but herself. When asked about her legacy, Ron Howard chose his words carefully, but didn't hold back. She chased perfection so hard, she forgot compassion. Her fall wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful unraveling. The woman who once ruled Hollywood ended up alone, even avoided at events celebrating her own movies. To Howard, Dunaway became the ultimate warning, proof that talent without kindness destroys itself. "People talk about power," he once said, "but in Hollywood, power without grace turns to poison." And then there was John Wayne, the tyrant of the West. Few figures loomed as large over Hollywood as he did. John Wayne was the face of America, the fearless cowboy, the soldier, the ultimate tough guy. But to Ron Howard, who grew up watching him in black and white, the truth behind that image was way darker. "When I learned what he was really like," Howard once said, "I stopped seeing the hero. I saw a bully wearing patriotism like a costume." Born Marion Morrison in 1907 in Iowa, Wayne built his career on the myth of unshakable masculinity. By the 1950s, he wasn't just a movie star, he was an ideology. On set, he ruled through fear. Crew members said he'd curse people out in front of everyone if they didn't meet his standards. Actor Christopher Mitchum remembered it vividly. When Duke got angry, the air froze. You either agreed with him or you were gone. Ron Howard later called that kind of behavior the opposite of art. It's fear pretending to be discipline. Wayne's harshness didn't stop at work either. He often belittled women, mocked indigenous actors on Western sets, and dismissed black performers who challenged stereotypes. Then came the infamous Playboy interview of 1971, one of the most shocking Hollywood moments ever printed. In it, Wayne made jaw-dropping comments about Native and black Americans that sparked outrage for decades. When those words resurfaced years later, the world saw not a hero, but a man trapped in his own hate and pride. On the set of The Searchers, John Wayne went head-to-head with director John Ford. The two clashed hard over Wayne's portrayal of Ethan Edwards, a bitter ex-Confederate filled with hate. Ford wanted depth and reflection, but Wayne refused. In the final cut, the character's cruelty burned through, and so did the actor's real-life contempt. Ron Howard, who later studied that performance at USC, said, It's terrifying because you can't tell where the role ends and the man begins. Even as illness weakened him in his final years, Wayne never apologized. He brushed off his critics as too soft and blamed the shifting culture for his own downfall. When he passed in 1979 at 72, many still called him an American legend. But to filmmakers like Ron Howard, his story was a warning. Power built on prejudice doesn't turn into wisdom. It rots into bitterness. The myth survived, Howard said, but the man behind it never deserved the legend. Then came Roman Polanski, the exile of shame. For Ron Howard, that name stood for Hollywood's most painful truth. Brilliance can hide darkness. I admired his films before I knew who he really was, Howard once admitted. Then I realized talent doesn't forgive a person, it hides them. Born in Paris in 1933 to Polish parents and a survivor of war, Polanski's life was steeped in tragedy long before fame. His breakout hits, Knife in the Water and Rosemary's Baby, made him a global sensation, turning fear into art. But the shadows behind his films were all too real. Polanski's movies weren't just dark, they were reflections of his own shadow. But in March 1977, that illusion came crashing down when he was arrested for the assault of 13-year-old Samantha Gailey after a photo shoot at Jack Nicholson's home. The evidence was undeniable. Polanski pled guilty to unlawful contact with a minor, then fled to France before sentencing and never came back. Hollywood split in half. Some called him a genius, others saw the truth. For young Ron Howard, that reaction was soul-crushing. They talked about art while a child's life was shattered, he said years later. To him, Polanski's escape wasn't a scandal. It was a stain that never faded. Even in exile, Polanski kept directing, and shockingly, in 2003, he won an Oscar for The Pianist. Ron Howard called that moment surreal and sickening. The entire Dolby Theater stood applauding while he refused to rise. I thought of that girl, alone at 13, and how applause must sound to her even decades later, he said quietly. When Polanski later won France's César Award in 2020, protesters stormed out in fury, and Howard saw that as a kind of long-delayed justice. It took the world 40 years to say what should have been said the next day, he told Vanity Fair in 2021. A monster doesn't become less monstrous just because he can frame a shot. Polanski still lives freely in Europe, untouchable, yet forever haunted. His name has become a symbol of hypocrisy, proof of a system that protects the artist and forgets the victim. Hollywood forgives anything, Ron Howard once said bitterly, as long as the lighting is good. Then came Mickey Rooney, the smile that lied. If Polanski represented Hollywood's hypocrisy, Rooney was its illusion, the belief that charm could hide cruelty. For Ron Howard, who grew up watching Rooney's cheerful musicals late at night, the truth behind that grin hit like a punch. He was the face of joy, Howard said once, but behind that smile was misery, and worse, he spread it. Born Joseph Yule Jr. in 1920, Rooney was Hollywood's first child superstar. By 18, he was the highest-paid actor in America. MGM built an empire around his bright-eyed energy. The all-American kid who sang, danced, and charmed his way into millions of hearts. But fame that big comes with a price. Rooney's private life spun out fast. 8 marriages, endless affairs, reckless gambling, and constant chaos. His ex-wife, Ava Gardner, once joked he was the shortest man with the biggest ego in the world. Behind the closed doors, things got darker. By 2011, his 8th wife, Jan Chamberlain, and stepson were accused of mistreating and manipulating him financially, exposing the painful truth behind Hollywood's favorite grin. They drained Rooney's accounts and cut him off from his own family. But long before that, the pain he caused others had already become Hollywood legend. Former co-stars described him as unpredictable and cruel, someone who could light up a room one second and tear it apart the next. Judy Garland, his closest friend during their MGM years, once said privately that he could make you laugh one moment and destroy you the next. Garland, pushed to exhaustion by the studio system, later hinted that Rooney shared part of the blame for her suffering. By the 1960s, his stardom had collapsed. Addiction, bankruptcy, and endless scandals trailed him everywhere. In a 1979 interview, Rooney bragged, I've lived 1,000 lives. But Ron Howard later reflected, yeah, but he lived them all for himself. Even in old age, Rooney's bitterness never left him. He blamed everyone, the studios, his wives, even fate, for how far he'd fallen. When he passed in 2014 at 93, he left behind less than $20,000, and his body went unclaimed until friends raised money for a small funeral in Los Angeles. For Ron Howard, Rooney's downfall wasn't just sad, it was symbolic, proof that the Golden Age's brightest smiles were really masks. He made the world laugh while he was dying inside, Howard said quietly. And maybe that's the saddest evil of all, when pain turns into performance and nobody sees it. To Ron Howard, these weren't just stories. They were warnings carved into Hollywood's history. The so-called Golden Age wasn't golden at all. It was polished over pain. Behind the lights and applause hid silence, manipulation, and broken lives. Fame didn't heal anyone. It only buried the truth deeper. As Howard once said, the scariest monsters aren't in horror films. They're the ones the spotlight protects. And he was right. The real fear isn't in the scripts. It's in the smiles that fooled the world. So now the question is, which of these 6 icons shocked you the most? The predator, the tyrant, or the smiling liar? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you want more untold Hollywood stories that reveal the truth behind the fame.